All right, imagine this. Okay, a country, 1950, totally destroyed by war. Cities, rubble, and their economy. The per capita GDP was just $79. Like, seriously, $79. That was South Korea, like completely on the edge of existence. But then, fast forward just a couple decades, and you see the same country is like this huge tech giant, a global cultural force, an economic miracle, basically. So how did they pull it off? That's what we're going to be looking at in this deep dive. Get ready, because the story of South Korea is one for the history books.
Yeah, it's honestly an incredible change. And to get it, we got to go back to right after the Korean War ended. I mean, try to picture it. A country that lost millions of people, all its infrastructure just wrecked, the economic and the mental impact. It was just massive.
That was totally devastating. Plus, on top of all that, they had to deal with a split peninsula and North Korea right there being hostile. What a tough place to start.
Oh, totally. And their own internal politics weren't helping at all. Syngman Rhee, the first president, he ran an authoritarian government totally full of corruption. Not really the kind of stable situation you need to get your economy back on track.
So you've got a nation facing threats from outside, instability on the inside, and just widespread poverty. It's hard to see a way forward from there.
And yet they found one. When Park Chung-hee came to power in '61, that's a real turning point. Now, sure, him taking over in a military coup, definitely controversial. But the guy had a crystal clear vision for South Korea. He was convinced their future was all about becoming a major exporter.
And this is where we get to that whole miracle on the Han River thing, right? Everybody talks about that crazy economic growth.
Exactly. Park put these ambitious 5-year plans into action. They went after specific industries. Steel, shipbuilding, electronics. Keep in mind, this was still a country that relied mostly on agriculture. This was a bold move. Some might even call it radical.
It sounds like they completely flipped their economic system around. Were there groups in South Korea who pushed back against these huge changes?
Oh, there were definitely challenges and people who opposed it. But Park's government, they were set on making their vision happen. It wasn't just about goals. It was about getting things done. They had to figure out how to compete globally and fast. So they got, creative.
Okay, now I'm curious. What kind of creative stuff are we talking about? Do they have some secret weapon or something?
You could say that, yeah. South Korea embraced this thing we call reverse engineering. Think of it like, taking apart some complicated machines to figure out how it works. They took technologies from Japan, from the West, broke them down, studied them, and then built their own versions.
So they were like speed running their learning process by picking apart what others did well. That's pretty clever, but wouldn't that cost a fortune? How do they even afford all that?
Good question, and this is where the chaebols enter the picture. These were family-run conglomerates, names you'd recognize today. Samsung, LG, Hyundai. The government teamed up with these chaebols, gave them support and incentives. They became the engine driving this whole economic transformation.
So the government had the vision. The chaebols had the power to make it happen. Pretty unusual approach, but it definitely paid off big time. What were some of the potential downsides to this whole model?
Well, yeah, that close relationship between the government and these powerful chaebols definitely had its critics. Some people said it squashed competition and gave way too much power to a handful of families. There were real concerns about whether things were fair and transparent. But you can't deny this model was crucial in getting South Korea onto the global economic stage. By the 80s, they were a major player, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing comeback story. But economic growth is only one part of it. What else was happening in South Korea that turned them into the innovation powerhouse they are today?
Education. That's the key. South Korea knew that to keep this crazy economic growth going, they needed a workforce that could compete globally, people with the right knowledge and skills.
So they realized that investing in people, in human capital, was just as important as building roads and bridges and all that.
Exactly. Education became like a national obsession. The government threw tons of resources into making schools better, training teachers better. They set the bar really high, and the whole country just embraced this idea of being the best, academically, I mean.
I've heard some things about the pressure students face in South Korea's education system. It's pretty intense. Is there any truth to that?
It's not just stories, it's real. Students spend hours and hours studying in school and at these private cram schools, they call them hagwons. Getting into the top universities is super competitive, and families, they sacrifice a lot to make sure their kids have every chance to succeed.
Sounds kind of brutal. It's impressive that they reach such high levels of education, but are there any downsides to this kind of pressure cooker environment?
That's a good question, yeah. There's definitely a debate about whether this super competitive system stifles creativity, hurts mental health, prevents people from having a balanced life. It's complicated, no easy answers, but you can't deny that focus on education is a big part of why South Korea is so successful.
So they've got this booming economy, a highly educated workforce. What's next for them?
Well, like every country, South Korea has had its setbacks. The Asian financial crisis in the late 90s hit them pretty hard. But true to form, they adapted, they evolved. That crisis forced them to diversify their economy, to look beyond just manufacturing. And that's where the Korean Wave comes in, the Hallyu.
Oh, the Korean Wave, K-pop, Korean dramas on Netflix, Parasite, winning that Oscar. It feels like Korean culture is everywhere these days. So what's interesting is that it seems intentional, not just a coincidence.
You're right. It was a strategic move by the South Korean government to get their culture out there on the global stage. And it's worked incredibly well. K-pop groups like BTS, they've got millions of fans all over the world. Korean dramas are all over streaming services. Korean films are winning awards left and right.
It's pretty genius when you think about it. They've turned their culture into a major export, bringing in billions of dollars and boosting South Korea's image globally. But their success isn't limited to entertainment, is it? They're a tech powerhouse, too.
For sure. Think about Samsung phones, LG appliances, Hyundai cars. You see these brands everywhere. But South Korea's tech scene goes way deeper than just consumer products.
Okay, tell me more. What else are they doing in tech that puts them on the cutting edge?
Well, for one thing, South Korea has some of the best digital infrastructure in the world. They were early adopters of high-speed internet, and they're still pushing the limits of connectivity. They're also leading the way in smart cities, urban areas that use technology to be more efficient, more sustainable, and just better places to live.
Smart cities? Sounds futuristic. What does that look like in practice?
Imagine a city where traffic flows smoothly because of smart traffic systems, where energy use is optimized, where people can access government services easily through a really advanced e-government platform. That's the kind of future South Korea is building.
That's impressive. But even with all they've accomplished, I'm guessing there are still challenges ahead. No country's story is without its complexities, right?
You're right about that. South Korea's success story isn't perfect. They've got problems like a rapidly aging population because of low birth rates, concerns about income inequality, and of course, there's always the tension with North Korea.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Even with all the amazing progress, no country can escape those tough social and political issues. Let's dig into those a little more, those challenges. You mentioned that aging population thing, the low birth rates. What does that mean for South Korea's future?
It's a big deal, honestly. A smaller workforce means slower economic growth. Plus, it puts a strain on things like healthcare and pensions. South Korea is trying to figure out how to handle this demographic shift. It's something a lot of developed countries are dealing with right now.
And you brought up income inequality, too. Is that a side effect of how fast their economy grew?
Definitely a factor, yeah. The chaebols, they've been a huge part of South Korea's economic success, but them being so dominant has raised concerns about wealth being concentrated at the top. Smaller businesses might not have the same opportunities. The government's working on it, though, trying to make things more balanced, with policies that create a fair economic landscape for everyone.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between encouraging economic growth and making sure everyone has a fair shot.
Exactly. And then there's the big one, North Korea. The constant tension, the threat of conflict, it hangs over everything South Korea does. It's this constant uncertainty, and it drains their resources.
It's a reminder that even the most incredible transformations can't just erase those geopolitical realities. But despite all that, South Korea's story is one of resilience, of innovation, of just constantly pushing for progress.
Couldn't agree more. They've shown the world that if you have a plan, if you invest in your people, if you're willing to adapt, even a country that's been devastated by war and poverty can become a global leader.
South Korea's journey is inspiring. It shows what humans are capable of, the power of people working together. It's a story that has valuable lessons for every country out there, whether they're already developed or still developing.
Absolutely. It proves that not having a lot of natural resources isn't a life sentence. South Korea focused on education, on tech innovation, on their cultural impact. They carved out their own unique spot on the world stage. Their story gives us hope, reminds us that even when things seem impossible, change is possible.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into South Korea's incredible transformation, I want to leave you with this question. What parts of their journey really resonated with you? And what lessons can we take from their experience to make a positive impact in our own communities and the world as a whole?